Hey guys, so in this part of the interview, I talk with Dario Nardi about how the types look like when they are gripped by their shadow. And we also talk about how the types move through different stages of development from the shadow stage to being culturally adaptive and then to being whole with joy. And that's the stage where they reach transcendence. And Dr. Nardi has a very interesting, fascinating way of talking about this. He speaks about it in a very objective, non-judgmental kind of way, such that the shadow side has its purpose and that we cycle through the shadow being culturally adaptive and being whole with joy time and time again. And I'm also curious if you recognize this within your life piece. It's true for my life. So I want to tell you I have a new channel and I have a link to it above here. And it's about how you can use psychological tools to embetter your own psychological well being. And just to let you know, there's much more to this interview than this video. There's many parts to it, so there's a lot to look forward to. So subscribe and stay tuned. So let's take a look at these three stages. So what I see in the article is that you have a whole with joy stage, a culturally adapted stage, and also in a dark grip stage, and that's true for every type. And we revisit these stages again and again over our life, but in a different manner. We have a different perspective on it each
Hmm.
time.
Yeah.
What I thought was enlightening is that you could even revisit the in the dark grip stage, but from a different perspective, like even from a more enlightened perspective.
Hmm. And it could be, there's always a little bit of what is it, potential for challenge. So the second or third time around, the person will be like, "Oh, I've been in this space before," and have some sense, especially by the third time, that they can get out of it. That there are ways to do this. On the other hand, each space provides an opportunity.
Hmm.
It's not just like a random space developmentally. It's providing an opportunity, like, okay, I'm like is being assaulted with all of the shadow material. Like, do I want to deal with this, or am
Hmm.
I going to like suppress it in some way?
Yes.
Um, and to just be like the person who's just going to take antidepressants to be quote normal, and that's not actually dealing with any of their underlying issues. And or a person could say, like, what, I'm really going to challenge myself
Hmm.
in this shadow space, and I'm going to try and meet that shadow stuff head on. And like the work done on meditation and mindfulness shows that roughly 1 in 4 people actually have a negative experience with mindfulness activities. Negative because shadow stuff comes up, like pain and the past memories and all of these things, and it's like, yeah, do we want to challenge, like, tackle it? And so maybe the second or third time around we actually have more skill than to tackle something that
Interesting.
maybe we didn't even deal with really the first time around.
Hmm. Yeah. And I like that perspective of not having a stigma around it, that everyone has their shadow. And even in that stage, there's something to learn from that stage.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So let's take a look into that. So why don't we talk about each stage and then like kind of like how each type operates in that stage a bit. And definitely, if you want to look at everyone, if you want to look at this in detail, definitely read the article. I'll have it down below in the description. So the first one is why don't we start with being in the dark grip because we're just talking about it. So what is that?
I'm opening up like a sample page here, so it's since there's like 8 different sets of these, and each one. Um, the definition of being in the grip is that the non-preferred functions, they're associated with shadow material, meaning there's stuff that the person has pushed down into the subconscious.
Hmm.
It's not necessarily like archetypal material or whatever. These are like complexes, like bad childhood experiences, addiction. It takes different forms for different types, and though those, it's almost as if the shadow material has a hold of the person. And it isn't necessarily, an example would be like with extroverted thinking, when the shadow material takes hold, it can be stuff that's like the introverted feeling, but it isn't like, oh, the TE person is like crying all the time and sad or something like that. It can show up in like a really authoritarian, dictatorial, say ENTJ, who thinks that she's very objective. But in fact, if you only scratch the surface, you see it's all just based upon like personal belief and desires for what's true, and that the usual strengths are not being allowed. It's like the person's strengths have been hijacked,
Mm.
and they're not really. I think another example with extroverted intuiting is their capacity uh, to see like possibilities, potential possibilities in the environment, and to point those out and to nurture those, or to like shift the direction of a situation toward those. But they can easily come off as like an extreme, like Barnum Bailey kind of person. And I've met these say like ENFP or ENTP before, where it's like every moment I'm just thinking like it sounds like they're lying, and they may not be lying, but they're, in addition to the usual stuff, that their life is not put together, that they act very chaotically, that they don't take any responsibility for their behavior. And what's underlying all of it is these introverted sensing, oftentimes impressions from childhood experience or whatever it is, that play this oversized role in the person.
Mm.
That's like a pain or hurt or whatever it is that they're not acknowledging or dealing with, and they're just sort of pushing that down. And because it is SI, like it's leading to a whole bunch of like habit kind of behavior that they don't even see as habits, but there's this chaos to it that comes out of rejecting and not dealing with the underlying introverted sensing issue
Mm.
that's there. So it's not just about like, oh, I'm a really extreme NE type and I'm not doing any SI. I mean, it could be like that, but really it's coming out of this place where the opposite, there's one-sidedness, and the opposite is not being dealt with. Like it's there and it's not being dealt with, and it's actually rising to the point where in practice it's taking over the person.
Yes.
And for NI types, it's going to be, going from this like healthy NI, which is awareness of one's own creative process, and trusting the unconscious as a way to do problem solving in life, to just being like one terrified of what's going on in their physical environment, like not wanting to deal with that for whatever reasons, and then just getting like completely like superstition, believing in like all of these abstract things. Like I don't mean astrology in general, because the things could actually be good, but like they're putting their whole psyche into it and saying like, I'm gonna let the astrological chart like tell me what to do.
Mm. Yeah, interesting. Yeah.
And that's the there are all these different extremes. I think how I wrote it hopefully is says a little bit better than that, but each one has its challenges, and it's really about a dynamic between the different functions, not even just dominant and inferior, but all of them.
Yes. Yeah, I think that that's interesting. That reminds me of what Jung said, that when we're so focused on the conscious, the unconscious will operate in a very secret manner and actually take over the personality in
Mm-hmm.
a way. So I'm also curious, like, what would you say about FI types?
Um, so let's, because that's the page that I turned to, thinking
Mhm.
like maybe um, we can, maybe that's something to come up. And so why not take a look at that? Except of course the book closed while I wasn't looking. That's it. And I did save the FI for last in the book because why not? And something I did do, by the way, is I have 4 pages of quotes from Jung,
Hmm.
and for every function. So in the dark grip for FI, in this space, everything is starkly good or bad. This quiet crusader is highly judgmental. His or her beliefs are reality, and anything that does not match the ideals is villainized or suppressed. If societal pressure is strong, then aspects of the quiet crusader's own identity that do not match are also squashed. The result is a deep seated tension, often based in the gut, and the person projects resentment, anger, and even hatred onto others, endlessly analyzing their minds and motives, both those who oppose and oppress, as well as those who have already suspiciously freed themselves from societal tyranny. This anger can explode or alternate with depression or anxiety, which the person may also refuse to recognize.
Hmm.
And an example, which I don't want to give too much detail to because it's part of a men's group, but there was an INFP in the men's group, and his main issue when he came in is that literally every day he was so filled with anger and hatred over political differences with his next door neighbor that it was ruining his life.
Hmm.
And he knew that there was like something wrong and didn't know how to deal with it. Because his self image is like I believe myself as this very liberal, progressive, like positive, want to see the best in people, and yet he's like the fact is I'm actually this person who's filled with hatred for an actual person
Hmm.
who's right there, and how do I reconcile that? And he lived in that state actually for years until he came into the process, and he came in very cynical and with this attitude of like, let's see if you can even persuade me.
Hmm.
Because he had this sense that like, oh, the group is like, everyone is phony and they're wearing masks and it's not the real them. And in his case, like it was a very strong, uh, it's like that lack of, there's contradictions within the identity
Yeah.
and how to deal with that. And the fact that he's human. And I think ultimately an issue is that is happens with many NFs is I love the whole world but can't get along with anyone in it. And so how am I going to deal with that? And he was really unhappy, and it was just a process. It was great to see him over months like actually release a lot of that. And of course that was his work, not his neighbor's work to do.